let's talk a little bit about testing basics. And once again, I think this is really important because even the most experienced of online marketers and conversion testing folks kind of fall into this trap sometimes, and we forget to kind of take a step back and really analyze what we're testing and why we're testing, and if this is really the best place to be testing. So I really like talking about these 4 steps of testing. These questions ultimately you should be asking yourself before you start any test. First off, there really is only 2 types of data that you're working with here. You're working with quantitative data, and that's ultimately the numerical data. Okay, so you have a 5% open rate, a 10% open rate on your emails, a 0.05% click-through rate on your digital ads, a 1.5% conversion rate on your landing page. So the quantitative is really what you're looking at to identify what you should be testing. All right, do I think we can be doing better with our open rates, our conversion rates? So that will identify what you're testing. But then there's the qualitative, and that's actually where you're going to test. So you have a 10% open rate. How can we improve that 10% open rate? What element can we test to improve that 10% open rate? Subject line. We have a 1.5% conversion rate. That's the quantitative. Where should we test to improve that 1.5% conversion rate? The landing page. That's the qualitative. So those are really the 2 types of data that you're working with. And it's very important, I find it very important to lead off this webinar with this, because over the years, I've worked with so many organizations. Once again, both internally, but as somebody working at an agency, where people come up with a lot of odd reasons why things work and don't work. You know, holidays, things like whatever. All you can really say for sure is you know what the open rates are and you know the elements that you should be testing. And that's what you really need to be focusing on. Next, form a hypothesis. So basically saying, hey, this is what we're testing, this is why we're testing it, and this is ultimately what we expect to happen because of this testing. And once again, sounds really simple, but if I had $1 for every time a client who was spending a ton of money on their online marketing never put together the who, what, where, when, and why of their test, I would not be giving a webinar today, okay? It is so important to take a step back and really form a hypothesis and also document it. You know, ask yourself, hey, if we test this subject line, we expect to get a 15% open rate, and this is why. Write it down. You'll be surprised going through this process of, you know, once again, accepting that it's just, there's only 2 types of data, quantitative and qualitative, but then putting down a hypothesis. You would be surprised just by doing those 2 things that you might actually say to yourself, you know what, this test isn't the right test we're running, or this test isn't going to move the ball as much as we want. We really should be testing here. So it's a very important exercise to really identify what you're testing, why you're testing, but also after you run the test to see if it was, if you're on the path, if it was a success or not. And then of course you put together your experiment. So thinking about the content, thinking about the design, thinking about the technology, but most importantly, tracking. Tracking. Once again, if I had $1 for every time a client, whether they're doing email, whether they're doing advertising, just had no tracking in place and really couldn't get a clear read on what was working and what wasn't working, I would be a very, very rich man. It is so important to have your tracking in place. And this is probably, quote unquote, the least sexy part of online marketing, but this by far, in my opinion, is one of the most important things. Because I don't see how you could have a test if you can't accurately track what happened with that test. So having the proper links and being able to link up to whatever you're using for your analytics, let's say Google Analytics, tracking is so important. There's a lot of things, and anybody who's worked with me or worked for me on my team knows I forgive pretty much any mistake under the sun. We're all human. The one thing I have a very short fuse on, and not very forgiving on is tracking, because that's the one thing. You can spend $20,000 on a test, and if you don't have good tracking, if you don't have clear tracking, you just wasted that money. So tracking, tracking, tracking. And then finally, interpreting the results. So this is one thing, I know that sounds very common sense, but all tests, first off, you must be able to duplicate those results. Something happening once isn't a trend, all right? So this, whatever that test is, you need to be able to replicate. You need to show that it is consistently happening. Also, it needs to be statistically significant. I just actually had a very long conversation with a client about 2 hours ago. He came up with a test, and I said, hey, that's a really interesting idea for a test. Problem is, it's too small of a sample set, because the fact of the matter is, if you had 15 conversions for version A and then 13 conversions for version B, well, guess what? Version A didn't win. That's a tie. That's a coin toss. You take one from A and put it over to B, guess what? They're tied, okay? So it's really, 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 really important that it's statistically significant. And the question that just came in, and definitely, and I get this question asked all the time, what is statistically significant? Well, it depends. The type of testing I do and the volumes of testing that I do, I typically say, hey, 1,000 of whatever you want to happen, so whatever that conversion is, and you can define conversion by anything. It could be a form fill, it could be a sale, it could be a click-through, who knows. Conversion is something that you define, and with a 10% lift. And the reason I say that, because if you have 900 of A and 1,000 of B, well, guess what? That's a very clear winner. Or 500 of A and 400 of B, or 450 of B, that's a pretty clear winner. But if you have 210 of A and 195 of B, not so much. Okay, so it needs to, any test that you do, it is extremely important that you need to be able to duplicate that test, but it also has to be statistically significant. Having 1 versus 3, not statistically significant.